The sky above the Colorado frontier shimmered with heat, even though the day had begun to fade. Golden light stretched long shadows across the open land, where silence was interrupted only by the distant cry of hawks circling overhead and the soft swish of tall prairie grass dancing in the breeze. A lone rider cut across the horizon, hat low, reins steady, rifle strapped across his back. His name was Wyatt Boone, a man of few words, fewer friends, and a reputation wrapped in mystery. Wyatt had been riding since dawn, trailing a stubborn herd back to his employer's ranch, but as the sun began to dip and the cattle were safely penned, he took a different path home, one that led him near the winding banks of the Moccasin River. The river was known for its unpredictable moods, one day calm and whispering, the next roaring and deadly from sudden mountain storms. The locals, especially the nearby native tribes, called it the river that remembers, a place where stories were born and lives sometimes ended. Wyatt wasn't the superstitious type, but something about that river always made him slow down. As he reached a narrow ridge that overlooked a bend in the water, his ears picked up something that didn't belong. It was faint at first, then again a cry, sharp, desperate, small. He froze. There it was again, a child's scream, carried on the wind like a ghost calling out. His horse snorted nervously, sensing something. Wyatt yanked the reins and turned toward the sound without hesitation. He galloped hard, down the ridge and through brush that tore at his coat. Branches scratched his face, but he didn't slow. His heart pounded in time with his horse's hooves as he reached the river's edge. There, caught in the current, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 10, her small hands clinging to a broken tree limb that had lodged against a rock midstream. The water surged around her, dragging at her legs, threatening to pull her away. Her long black hair was plastered to her face, eyes wide with panic. She was native, he could tell from her features, but right now, she was just a child, seconds from drowning. Wyatt jumped off his horse, threw off his duster, kicked off his boots, and the water hit like a wall of ice. It stole his breath and filled his ears, but he didn't stop. With powerful strokes, he battled the current, dodging debris and sharp rocks. It was a fight just to stay on course. He reached her as her fingers began to slip. "I got you," he shouted, wrapping one arm around her waist. She didn't scream, didn't speak. She just clung to him, small and trembling. As he turned and let the current carry them toward shore, the river tried to pull them back, but Wyatt found footing on a submerged rock and pushed with everything he had. When they reached land, he dragged her onto the bank, both of them gasping. She collapsed onto the grass, shivering. Wyatt coughed up water, then turned to her. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice rasping. She didn't respond. Her lips were blue, and her arms hugged her chest tightly. Wyatt grabbed his blanket from his saddlebag and wrapped it around her. He knelt beside her, watching her closely. She looked up at him, not with fear, but with disbelief. She had seen something impossible. A cowboy, a white man, had risked his life for her. In her world, that didn't happen. "Don't worry," Wyatt said softly. "You're safe now." He scanned the surrounding land. There were no signs of anyone nearby, no riders, no footprints, no tracks leading to her. "Where had she come from? Where's your family?" he asked. Still no answer. She sat curled under the blanket, silent, watching him. Wyatt sighed and sat beside her. The sun was nearly gone now, and the air had cooled. Night would be dangerous in these parts. Wolves, cougars, and other things not easily scared by gunfire. He made a small fire, using dry brush and the kindling he always carried. As the flames rose, the girl inched closer, drawn to the warmth. She still didn't speak, but she stopped shivering. He handed her a piece of jerky and a tin of water. She took them with trembling hands, eating slowly, eyes never leaving him. "You got a name?" he asked, not expecting an answer. She blinked, then whispered so softly he almost missed it. "Tala." "Tala," he repeated. "That's a pretty name." He nodded toward her necklace, small turquoise beads, and a carved wooden bear. "You're from one of the tribes nearby." She nodded, slowly, then pointed west, toward the Black Mesa Range. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow, I'll take you back." He didn't know what kind of trouble he was inviting. This was sacred land for many tribes. A cowboy like him riding in with a child could be seen as a threat or worse. But Wyatt wasn't the kind of man who turned away from what was right, not when a life was at stake. As the fire crackled, Tala began to relax. She curled up beside him, her small form finally giving into exhaustion. Wyatt sat awake for hours, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning. The darkness, every crack of a branch made his fingers twitch. But nothing came. Sometime after midnight, she shifted in her sleep and whispered in her native tongue. He didn't understand the words, but the tone told him everything: fear, grief, maybe even prayers. Wyatt sat in silence, heart heavy, wondering what this girl had seen, what she'd survived. By dawn, the fire was little more than ash. He stood and stretched, bones stiff from the cold night. Tala stirred as he saddled his horse. He helped her up gently, setting her in front of him on the saddle. "Let's get you home," he said. As they crested the hill leading toward the mesa, Wyatt heard something strange in the distance, the deep, steady rumble of hooves. At first, he thought it was a stampede. Then he saw them. Dozens of riders. They came from 5 different directions, converging on the riverbank. Horses of every color, painted ponies, solid black stallions, whites that shone like snow. The warriors were in full dress, feathers, beads, painted faces, spears, bows, and war paint. Each tribe was different, but they rode with unity. Wyatt stopped his horse, eyes narrowing. He wasn't afraid, just alert. He wasn't foolish enough to draw a weapon, not when outnumbered 20-1. The riders slowed as they approached. A circle formed around him and Tala. The girl didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted her arms and called out a name: "Uncle." One of the men stepped forward, sliding off his horse. His chest was broad, eyes sharp, and his long black hair was tied with feathers. He approached quietly, then fell to one knee and embraced Tala. Tears ran down her face, but her voice was strong. She began speaking rapidly in her language. The man's eyes flicked up to Wyatt, surprised, then softened. Another rider came forward, older, wrapped in a buffalo robe, with a staff carved from bone. He was a medicine man, clearly respected. He looked Wyatt up and down, then nodded. "You brought her back," he said in accented English. "You saved the chief's niece." Wyatt tipped his hat. "Did what anyone should have." The man smiled slowly. "No, not anyone would have, especially not here." The circle parted, and one by one, the tribesmen brought forward gifts: pelts of bear and elk, a woven blanket dyed in brilliant patterns, a carved flute, a bundle of wild herbs, a necklace of eagle feathers. The medicine man raised his staff and said, "5 tribes came today, not for vengeance, but to give thanks. You are now known among us as River Guardian." Wyatt looked around, stunned. All this for saving one girl, and somehow he knew this was only the beginning. The morning sun had barely lifted the shadows from the plains when the 5 tribes formed a perfect circle round Wyatt Boone. Each horse stood motionless, as if they understood the weight of the moment. At the center was Tala, still wrapped in Wyatt's blanket, her face half hidden beneath it, but her eyes alert. She sat beside her uncle, a tribal warrior whose presence seemed to command the respect of even the wind. Wyatt didn't move from where he stood. The only sound was the soft huff of horses and the rhythmic flap of eagle feathers tied to lances. His hand rested near his holster, not in threat, but in instinct. A lone cowboy surrounded by native riders from 5 different nations knew better than to show fear or arrogance. He just waited, calmly, his heart steady. One of the older men dismounted. He walked with the poise of wisdom, wearing a robe of stitched deer hide adorned with turquoise beads and a headdress with all feathers. His face was weathered by sun and time, but his eyes were fierce and alive. "I am called Red Elk," the elder said in accented English. "I speak for the 5. Wyatt gave a slow nod. "Wyatt Boone." "You brought her back," Red Elk said, motioning to Tala. "She is the blood of chiefs." "I found her," Wyatt said plainly. "Did what was right. Most white men would not. I'm not most." A faint smile tugged at Red Elk's mouth. He turned and motioned to the others. One by one, warriors stepped forward, each representing a different tribe: Apache, Comanche, Arapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne. Each laid something at Wyatt's feet: sacred cloth, buffalo pelts, medicine bundles, hand-carved arrows, and a long obsidian knife sheathed in rawhide. "These are symbols of peace and respect," Red Elk said. "You are now known among us as the one who heard the river cry. You pulled her back when even her ancestors could not." Wyatt was silent. Words didn't come easy to him, especially when he felt them too deeply. Another man stepped forward: Tala's uncle, a strong warrior named Chayton, his face marked with ceremonial paint. He knelt in front of Wyatt and placed a hand on the ground between them. "My brother was Tala's father," he said. "He died 3 winters ago in a hunting accident. Since then, we have all watched over her. Yesterday, she wandered too far, following the spirits of her ancestors along the river path. We searched all night, thought she was gone. She's tougher than she looks," Wyatt replied. Chayton nodded. "And wiser than most. She saw your heart before we arrived." Tala, now sitting on a painted pony beside her uncle, turned to Wyatt and gave him something from around her neck: her necklace of turquoise beads and the carved bear totem. She leaned over and placed it in his hand without a word. Wyatt stared at it, stunned. This was no small gift. This was protection, a blessing, something sacred passed down generations. He looked at her and then back at the warriors. "No one stopped her. She gives you her spirit brother's mark," said Red Elk. "You are not blood, but now you are family." Wyatt bowed his head slightly, unsure of what to say. Then Red Elk raised his staff high. "We will ride now, but the bond remains. Any man who sees this man Wyatt Boone sees a friend to the people." And just like that, the tribes began to move. It wasn't rushed nor slow. It was ceremonial, an exodus of honor. Hooves beat gently against the earth. Dust rose like prayers as they departed. Tala turned one last time and gave Wyatt a small wave. Then she was gone, riding beside her uncle toward the mesas in the west. Wyatt stood alone again, holding the necklace in his hand. The world was silent once more. Later that day it returned to his small cabin on the outskirts of Copper Bend, a quiet settlement where miners and ranchers rarely looked past their own boots. His place was modest: 1 room, a stone hearth, a few tools and books, and the scent of aged pine. He hung Tala's necklace beside his rifle, above the mantel, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The story of what happened that morning spread faster than wildfire. By sundown, the entire town had heard of the cowboy who saved the native chief's niece, and the 5 tribes who came not with arrows, but with honor. For many, it was the first time they'd ever heard of a peaceful gathering between such tribes. The people of Copper Bend were suspicious at first, some even fearful. "What do you reckon they really wanted?" muttered an old trapper at the saloon. "Reckon Boone struck some deal," said another. "Ain't no way all them tribes show up unless it's political." But Wyatt didn't care what they thought. He'd seen something bigger than politics or gossip. He'd seen grace, and it had shaken him in a way no cattle stampede or gunfight ever had. That night, he sat by his fireplace, boots off, sipping black coffee. His fingers grazed the necklace. River Guardian, he murmured, didn't ask for no title, but somewhere in the back of his mind, something stirred a quiet oath. He would not let the story end with that morning. He would keep watch, not because he had to, because he was part of something now, whether he liked it or not. Meanwhile, in the Mesa, Tala sat near the fire in her uncle's tent, surrounded by tribal leaders. Her voice was quiet, but firm as she told them everything from the river to the cold, from the cowboy's eyes to his silence. He didn't ask where I was from, she said. He didn't ask what I had. He just came. Her uncle looked across. The circle at the others. That is the kind of man we need in this land. One who does not weigh a child's worth by tribe or color. Red Elk spoke next. Then let us keep watch over him, too. The world is changing. Men like him will not go unchallenged. A murmur of agreement passed around the circle. One of the elders nodded. We will watch from the hills. If trouble comes, he will not face it alone. And so, without words written, a bond was formed not just between a cowboy and a girl, but between a man and 5 nations. Next day it rode into town for supplies. As he tied his horse outside the general store, he noticed something odd. People stared, not with scorn, but with curiosity, almost respect. A boy near the blacksmith whispered, "That's the one they called River Guardian." Inside, the shopkeeper, a woman named Martha, handed him a sack of flour and said quietly, "If you ever need help, you let us know." He tipped his hat, not used to such attention. As he stepped outside, he noticed a folded piece of deerskin on his saddle. No one was near. He opened it. Inside was a painted symbol, 5 feathers bound by red thread. A message was drawn in symbols, but Wyatt understood its meaning. You are watched. You are not alone. He smiled faintly. That evening in the hills surrounding Copper Bend, a lone figure sat hidden among the brush, watching Wyatt's cabin. A native scout, face marked in ash, watched over the man who had saved the child of the river. He was not there to interfere, only to protect. For many nights that would follow, Wyatt would not know how closely he was guarded. He would not see the riders in the shadows, the signals in the smoke, the silent warnings that traveled from ridge to ridge. All he knew was that something inside him had changed. He wasn't just a cowboy anymore. He was part of a promise. 3 days had passed since Wyatt Boone stood at the center of 5 converging tribes and walked away with a sacred title, River Guardian. Life in Copper Bend had returned to its rhythm, cattle bawling, miners drinking, and wagons creaking across dirt roads. But for Wyatt, nothing felt quite the same. He still rode the same trails, cooked the same beans, oiled the same saddle. But wherever he went now, he sensed he wasn't alone. The necklace Tala had given him, turquoise beads, and the carved wooden bear hung near his heart. Beneath his shirt, it warmed his chest in the cold mornings, and sometimes, when the wind howled through the canyon near his cabin, it felt like it vibrated faintly, as if it carried its own heartbeat. People in town started treating him differently. At first, it was just stares, curious and cautious. Then came the whispers. Then, gradually, respect. The bartender at Dry Rock Saloon poured his whiskey without asking for a coin. The blacksmith offered to fix his stirrups for free. Even Sheriff Colburn, a hard-nosed man known for his rigid posture and mistrust of Indians, tipped his hat when Wyatt passed. Still, Wyatt didn't care much for attention. He was a man who preferred to blend into the land, not stand out from it. And yet, there was one person who still watched him with a storm behind the eyes. His name was Doyle Mercer. Doyle was the foreman of the Double M Ranch, the largest cattle operation this side of the Red Hills. He had money, men, and an appetite for control. His father had built the ranch on what used to be tribal hunting grounds, and Doyle had no patience for Indian talk or peacemaking. In his eyes, the only good deal with native tribes was one signed with a bullet, and when word reached him that Wyatt Boone had stood in peace among 5 tribes and walked away not just alive, but honored, Doyle saw it as betrayal. He's one of them now, he told his men, spitting tobacco onto the dirt floor of his barn, and that makes him dangerous. But he saved a kid, one of his ranch hands said quietly. Doyle narrowed his eyes. Doesn't matter. He brought them here. 5 tribes riding that close to Copper Bend? That's not peace, that's preparation. For what? For war. Doyle paced. We wait too long. They'll start demanding land back, start setting rules, start thinking they got a right to be here. They do, don't they? The same hand muttered. Doyle grabbed him by the collar. You either ride with me, or you ride alone. The man didn't answer, just looked away. That same afternoon, Wyatt was cleaning his rifle on the porch when he heard a soft whistle from the hills. He paused. It came again, 3 notes, sharp, precise. Then he saw a shadow emerge from behind the rocks. It was a rider, but not like any settler or cowboy. It was Winnea, a young scout from the Lakota band. Her hair was braided tight, and her movements flowed like wind over grass. She rode bareback on a painted mare, bow slung across her shoulder. Wyatt stood up. You watchin' me again? He said, half-dash smiling. She didn't smile back. We need to talk. She dismounted and tied her horse to a cedar post. Wyatt handed her water and motioned to a chair, but she stood. There are men planning to strike. White men, ranchers, they meet in secret, speak in anger. They say the tribes are gathering for war. They say you are the cause. Wyatt's jaw tightened. I saved a girl. They don't see that. They see fear, and fear makes weak men dangerous. Why come to me? Because you are in the middle, and in the middle, people get crushed unless they move first. Wyatt glanced toward the ridge. He could almost feel eyes watching tribal scouts, maybe more. Tell Red Elk and the others not to come near town for a while, he said. Not till I figure out what Mercer's planning. Winnea nodded, then hesitated. There's more. She reached into her satchel and handed him a folded strip of hide with tribal markings burned into it. Wyatt studied the symbols, 5 arrows, pointed inward, and 1 serpent underneath. What's this? A warning, she said. The 5 tribes agree if anyone spills native blood again near this land, they will ride together, not for revenge, for justice. Are they preparing for war? They're preparing for you. Wyatt didn't waste time. He saddled his horse and rode straight to the Double M Ranch. The ranch hands stopped what they were doing when they saw him approach. They weren't used to seeing a man ride in so calm, so alone, and yet so dangerous. Doyle stepped out of the main house, rifle over his shoulder, and a sneer already curling his lips. Well, look who's finally picking a side, Doyle said. Or maybe you already did. Wyatt stayed seated on his horse, eyes steady. I hear things, Doyle. Things that sound a lot like trouble coming from your barn. You planning something stupid? Doyle laughed. Me nah, just talking with good folks about keeping the land safe from outsiders. You call a 10-year-old girl an outsider? Doyle's face turned red. Don't twist it. You brought tribes into town. They came close enough to scare the cattle. That ain't peace, that's pressure. They came to thank me, Wyatt said. That girl you're talking about, she's a chief's niece. But more than that, she's a child, and I won't apologize for saving her. Doyle stepped forward, rifle now in both hands. You ride with them, you fall with them. Wyatt's voice dropped to steel. I ride with what's right, And if you so much as fire a shot toward those people, you'll answer to more than me. You threatening me, Boone? No, I'm warning you." Then, without another word, Wyatt turned his horse and rode off. The sun was setting behind him, and the shadows grew long across the land. That night, Wyatt stood on the ridge outside town, looking out over the valley. A fire burned low beside him. Winia returned just before midnight. "They're moving," she said. "A group of 12, with rifles. They ride out tomorrow night. They say they're hunting the first scout they see." Wyatt's gut twisted. "Then they'll find you," she nodded, "unless we show them who the real hunter is." Wyatt stared at the horizon, then reached down and pulled Tala's necklace from under his shirt. He wrapped it around his wrist. "I'll ride ahead," he said. "They're expecting warriors. They won't expect me in the early dawn." As mist crawled along the grasslands and the sun cast long fingers of light over the mesas, Wyatt Boone set out alone again, only this time. He wasn't chasing cattle. He was chasing the truth, a truth that could save lives or start a war. And deep within the hills, 5 tribes waited in silence, not for orders, but for a signal. The river guardian had taken his stand. The wind howled across the plains that morning, carrying with it more than dust. It carried tension, the kind of tension that made birds scatter, that kept coyotes hidden, that made even the strongest horses uneasy. Wyatt Boone rode east before sunrise, away from the town, away from Copper Bend, toward the ridge known as Devil's Hollow. It was a narrow pass between two jagged cliff faces, dry brush below, black rock above, a known spot for ambush, and today he was betting on that. Because last night Winia had told him everything. 12 men, all armed, all ranchers, ranch hands, and old vigilantes from Doyle Mercer's circle. They were planning a warning raid to catch and kill a tribal scout near the mesa line and send a message. But what Doyle didn't know was that Winia's scouts had heard the plan, and Wyatt had a plan of his own. Wyatt reached Devil's Hollow just as the sky turned orange with dawn. The canyon walls were steep, black, and cracked like ancient scars. He dismounted, led his horse behind a thicket, and walked the ridge edge to scout the trail below. It was empty for now. He pulled out his old spyglass, an heirloom from his father's days in the war. Through it, he could see a mile out. The Double M riders were coming, kicking up dust and riding information. 12 men, just as Winia had said, rifles across their backs, bandanas over their faces. Wyatt looked to the east slope and saw them, the Watchers, for native scouts, crouched and still as stone. Their faces were painted for protection. Among them, Winia. She met his gaze for a moment, gave a nod, then melted back into the brush. They would not interfere unless blood was drawn. This was Wyatt's stand. He moved down to the trail, stood in the center, and waited. The riders came fast, expecting to catch a lone native scout or an unarmed traveler. But instead, they saw a tall man in a dust-stained hat, standing with arms crossed and a rifle strapped to his back. "Boone?" Doyle Mercer shouted from the front, pulling his horse to a stop. "What the hell are you doing out here? Saving you from a mistake," Wyatt said calmly. The other riders fanned out slowly, creating a loose semicircle. "You know what this is," Doyle said. "This ain't about you. You came here to kill," Wyatt replied. "You may call it a warning, but that girl you hate, she's someone's daughter, someone's niece. You fire one shot, and it won't be a warning, it'll be war." Doyle spat into the dust. "You really believe they won't take this land if we don't show force? You've been out there with them. You think they want peace? I've seen peace," Wyatt said, stepping forward. "I've earned it, and I've stood beside warriors who had every reason to hate men like us but chose to forgive. So don't feed me fear, Doyle. This is about your ego. You calling me a coward. I'm calling you a fool. Doyle's face twisted. He raised his rifle. For a split second, it looked like the shot would ring out. But Wyatt didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly reached into his coat and pulled out Tala's necklace. He held it up high, letting the morning light reflect off the turquoise beads and the carved bear. "She gave me this," Wyatt said. "Not because I'm native, not because I earned her trust, but because I protected her when no one else would." Several of the ranch hands hesitated. One lowered his rifle. Another turned his horse slightly, uncertain. "You kill me now," Wyatt said, "and you won't just be facing the tribes. You'll be facing every man, woman, and child who's tired of dying for nothing." Behind him, from the cliffs, a sharp whistle echoed a warning cry from Wania's scouts. They were watching, and they weren't alone. A new sound rolled over the hills, the pounding of hooves. Not from Doyle's men. This came from behind the ridge. Doyle turned his head sharply as a column of riders appeared, 20 or more, all native. Warriors from the 5 tribes, not attacking, not even approaching fast, but visible, present, calm. Behind them, elders. Behind the elders, women and children. They were watching, not with fear, with quiet judgment. One of Doyle's men, a boy no older than 20, dropped his rifle entirely. "This ain't what I signed up for," he muttered, turning his horse and galloping away. Another followed. Soon half the men turned their reins. Doyle stared at Wyatt, red-faced and breathing heavy. "You think you won?" Wyatt stepped forward again, now just feet from him. "There's no winning in this, Doyle, only surviving. And surviving means not being the spark that burns the whole damn prairie." Doyle shook his head. "You think just 'cause they gave you a trinket, you speak for 'em?" "No," Wyatt said, "but I know what they gave me. They gave me trust. And I'm not about to throw that away so you can feel like a bigger man for a long moment." Doyle stared at the necklace, then at Wyatt's face. He knew deep down he had lost this fight. With a bitter snarl, he yanked his reins and turned his horse. "This ain't over," he growled, then rode off. The rest followed, some ashamed, some relieved. The dust settled, and Wyatt stood alone again. Peace on the ridge. An hour later, on the same ridge, Wyatt sat by a fire with Wania and the first scouts. "You were ready to die," Wania said, not as a question, but a statement. "Figured someone had to be," Wyatt replied, sipping from a tin cup. "Why?" He looked at the necklace around his wrist. "Because peace doesn't come from fear. It comes from standing still when everything tells you to run." She nodded slowly. "The elders will speak of this. You stopped the first shot. That matters." Then she reached into her pack and pulled out a folded piece of hide decorated with symbols of the 5 tribes, 5 animals in a circle: a bear, a wolf, an eagle, a fox, and a buffalo. "They want to meet with you," she said, "not in secret, not in silence, in council." "Why me?" "Because you stood alone," she said, "and you didn't waver." Back in Copper Bend, news spread fast. The failed ambush. The tribes watching from the cliffs. Wyatt Boone standing down 12 armed men without firing a shot. Some folks in town couldn't believe it. Others couldn't believe how relieved they felt. Sheriff Colburn found Wyatt 2 days later fixing a fence near the creek. "You caused quite a stir," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Didn't mean to." "Well, you did. Some are angry, some scared, but some are thinking maybe we got a chance now, a real chance. Hell, some of them want to come to the council too." Wyatt looked up. "White men at a native council." Colburn shrugged. "World's changing. Boone, you might be the only one who knows how to walk both sides of it." Wyatt smiled faintly. "I ain't trying to walk both sides. I'm trying to build a bridge." As the sun dipped behind the mountains once more, Wyatt stood at the edge of his land, the wind brushing his coat, the necklace warm against his chest. Somewhere far off, The council fires were already being lit. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this much: he would ride toward it, not away. The moon was high and full when Wyatt Boone arrived at the sacred mesa. The journey had taken a full day's ride over sandstone ridges, through dense cottonwood groves, and past stone carvings that seemed older than time. The closer he rode, the more the land felt alive. Every gust of wind whispered old names. Every shadow felt like it had a history. He arrived alone, but not unseen. At the top of the mesa, 5 large fires already burned, each surrounded by circles of seated elders, warriors and families from the 5 nations: Comanche, Cheyenne, Apache, Ute, and Arapaho. It was not a battlefield. It was a place of honor, and Wyatt's presence had been expected. When Nia met him at the entrance, flanked by 2 elder warriors, she nodded once, solemnly. "They are ready to hear you," she said. "They call this the Council of the Crossing. It happens only when the nations must choose whether to remain apart or stand as one." "And me?" Wyatt asked, dismounting. "Why am I here?" "Because you are the Crossing." Wyatt was led to the center fire. Each of the 5 fires formed a loose circle round it. Seated on blankets and hides were the tribal leaders, draped in ceremonial garb. Some wore long headdresses, others cloaks made of bison hide. Some only bore sacred paint across their faces. Their expressions were unreadable, calm, quiet, but focused. Every eye was on him. Red Elk was the first to speak. "Wyatt Boone," he said, voice deep like distant thunder, "you entered our circle when you pulled a child from the river. We came to thank you, but now we ask more." Another elder spoke. "Peace does not live in the wind. It must be tied to a post and protected. We wish to make that post." A murmur followed. Wyatt glanced around. "What do you mean?" Red Elk turned to face him fully. "We want to build a place, a permanent one, between your world and ours. A trading post, a safe camp, a school for children of both bloods, on neutral land. Not mine, not yours, ours." Wyatt was stunned. "You want me to run it?" "No," Red Elk said, a flicker of humor in his eyes. "We want you to be its foundation. The tribes will build it. You will be its first guardian, like you were for Tala." For a long moment, Wyatt said nothing. Then he looked at the necklace around his wrist, the one Tala had given him, the one that started all of this. "I'm no leader," he said finally. "I can't promise people won't fight it. Peace doesn't come from promises," said a female elder from the Ute tribe. "It comes from those willing to bleed for it." Another elder spoke next. "You stopped 12 rifles with your voice. That is power." Wyatt looked at the flames, watched the smoke curl into the sky like prayers. "I'll do it," he said quietly, "but I won't do it alone." The next morning, while smoke still rose from the council fires, the elders walked the land with Wyatt, pointing out a location west of Copper Bend where a creek forked beneath a cottonwood grove, a place the 5 tribes once met before settlers came. It had long been neutral, forgotten, but the memory lived in the land. There, the elders agreed, the crossing place would be built. Within days, tribal families began arriving, men skilled in carpentry, women bringing seeds, children carrying bundles. The land was blessed in each language. Posts were driven into the soil not with iron, but with unity. Word reached Copper Bend quickly. At first, townsfolk were skeptical, but then something unexpected happened. Martha, the general store owner, sent dry goods to the building site. The blacksmith offered to help with iron nails and hinges. Even old Sheriff Colburn, who once didn't trust his own shadow, came out with a wagon of tools and stood shoulder to shoulder with a Comanche elder, silently handing over a hammer. Still, not everyone was pleased. Doyle Mercer watched it all unfold from a distance, jaw clenched, heart bitter. "They're building a camp," he said, fists shaking. Next thing you know, they'll want the town. No, one of his men said quietly. They just want a place to breathe. Doyle's anger grew like rot in his gut. 10 days into the construction, as walls began to rise and fires were lit for warmth, a familiar figure rode in from the western plains. Tala, riding beside her uncle Chayton. She wore a small deerskin dress with beads and carried a carved flute on her belt. When she saw Wyatt, she smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. She rode up and held out something new, a cloth with symbols on it. A bear, a bridge, a river, and the rising sun. This is for the crossing, she said. I made it. Wyatt took the cloth with reverence. It's beautiful. She says it means when two worlds meet, a third is born. Chayton translated. Wyatt felt his throat tighten. He nailed the cloth to the first finished wall of the small trading post. It fluttered in the wind. That evening, as the fire crackled and work ceased for the night, Winia sat beside Wyatt. The stars burned overhead, and the cottonwood swayed gently. You didn't have to stay, she said. I couldn't walk away. She studied him. You're different than most men. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I'm just trying to fix what other men broke. She smiled faintly. The fire you lit out here, it won't go out. Then we better keep feeding it. They sat in silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. The peace wouldn't last forever. In the darkness beyond the hills, Doyle Mercer wasn't finished. He was waiting, gathering men from other ranches who feared change, men who believed peace was weakness, men who remembered a time when Native people stayed out of sight and out of power. They're building a fort, Doyle lied. They're preparing to take the land back. If we don't strike soon, we'll lose everything. Got proof? One rancher asked. No, Doyle snapped. But we don't need proof. We need to remind them whose land this really is. He planned to strike at night, when the camp was most vulnerable. He would burn the crossing to the ground, and he would start with Wyatt Boone. As the stars shimmered over the high plains, the crossing place stood as a symbol of hope, half-built, fully alive. Native children played beside white settlers. Sons, tools passed hand to hand. Songs in multiple languages rose into the night sky. But not far away, hooves thundered in secret. The final test was coming, and Wyatt Boone would have to decide whether peace was worth dying for. The night air was sharp and still, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. The crossing place glowed softly under a sea of stars. Smoke from cooking fires drifted upward in peaceful coils, mingling with the scent of pine and roasted corn. Laughter rose from children chasing each other with hand-carved dolls. Tribal elders sat exchanging stories in their native tongues while settlers quietly sipped coffee from tin mugs nearby. For the first time in a long while, the land felt balanced. Wyatt stood on the wooden porch of the half-finished outpost, eyes scanning the tree line. He'd been uneasy all day, like some distant thunder was rolling in silence. His hand rested near his holster, not out of fear but instinct. The peace was fragile, like a glass sculpture balanced in a storm. One stone thrown wrong, and it would all shatter. Behind him, Winia emerged with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her long braids hung loose, catching the glow of the firelight. You haven't slept, she said gently. Can't, Wyatt replied, not with Mercer still out there. She stepped beside him, looking out toward the horizon. Do you think he'll come? I'd bet my horse he's already on his way. Miles away, hidden beneath a line of low ridges, Doyle Mercer sat astride his dark bay stallion. 20 men lined up behind him. Most were ranchers, some local, some from the next territory over. They weren't warriors, but they carried rifles and wore hard stares. Fear had twisted their thoughts. Doyle had fed them stories of a takeover, of a secret army gathering beneath the guise of peace. We strike hard and fast, he growled. They won't expect it. What about the kid? One man asked. The girl, the one he saved, Doyle, spat in the dirt. Collateral. They chose sides. That makes them enemies. A silence fell over the group, not of agreement but resignation. They moved like ghosts through the tall grass, hooves muffled in the soft earth. In their hands, torches and gunpowder. It was just after midnight when Shaitan, Tala's uncle and a seasoned scout, returned from the northern ridge's horse, lathered in sweat. They're coming, he told Wyatt, from the west, 20 men or more. Wyatt nodded. Weapons, rifles, and fire. When he stepped forward, we must evacuate the children. No, Wyatt said, that's what they want, to scatter us, to make this place disappear before it's even born. We'll fight. She asked, we'll stand. Within minutes, fires were doused, torches snuffed, voices hushed. The camp went dark but not defenseless. Elders gathered the children and led them deep into the cottonwood grove, where hollowed-out stone formations would hide them. Warriors took positions, bows drawn, rifles loaded. Settlers, too, joined them, hiding behind barrels, wagons, and wooden beams still under construction. They were few, but they were ready. When the first of Mercer's men crossed into the clearing, the moon cast them in silver silhouettes. Torches flared behind them, dancing like demons in the dark. At the head rode Doyle himself, shotgun in hand. He saw the buildings, the flags, the smoke from banked fires. He smirked. Then he saw Wyatt Boone, standing alone in the path. Thought, I might find you here, Boone, Doyle called out, stopping 10 yards away. I gave you every chance, but you went and chose them. I didn't choose sides, Doyle, Wyatt replied. I chose what's right. Mercer spat. You think a few fires and some wooden walls make peace. You're building a lie. No, Wyatt said quietly. We're building a future. Doyle raised his hand. His men stepped forward. But before he could speak again, a horn blew deep and low from the cliffside. And then they appeared. From the shadows of the hills, they came on horseback, 5 columns of mounted warriors from each tribe, riding silently, weapons drawn but not raised. Each group wore the symbols of their people, feathers, beads, war paint, and the strength of generations. They didn't surround Mercer's men. They flanked the crossing place, not attacking, but defending. For every rancher, there were now 2 warriors watching, waiting. Doyle's hand trembled slightly on his reins. What the hell is this? He muttered. Red Elk rode forward, his stallion steady and proud. This land does not belong to fear. The elder called out, it belongs to those who protect life. You came here to destroy something you do not understand. This ain't your country anymore, Doyle snapped. Red Elk's face was carved from stone. Then why does it still answer to our footsteps? A younger rancher stepped forward. They outnumber us. We can't win this. We don't have to win, Doyle snarled. We just have to burn it. But even his own men were shifting. Now some dismounting, others lowering their rifles. Fear had given way to doubt. Wyatt took a step forward. This doesn't have to end in blood, he said. Go home, Doyle. You burn this place, and you'll be burning something your grandchildren might have called home one day. A single shot silence. Then, with a sudden shout, Doyle jerked his reins and raised his shotgun. You think I'm scared of ghosts and feathers? He roared. You think that a single rifle shot rang through the air? Doyle's gun flew from his hand, his hat sailing off his head. He tumbled backward from his horse, landing hard in the dust. The shot had come from the tree line. Winia, rifle still smoking in her steady hands. No one else moved. Doyle groaned, crawling to his knees. Blood streamed from his temple, not fatal, but humbling. Wyatt approached and knelt beside him. You're lucky she aimed to disarm. You're making a mistake, Doyle hissed. No, Wyatt said. You did. You mistook kindness for weakness. Mercer looked up. Around him, his men were disarming, stepping back, eyes lowered. No war had been fought, no blood spilled except the battle was already lost. By sunrise, Doyle and his men had been escorted from the land not in chains, but in shame. The elders had chosen not to punish, but to release. Mercy, they believed, was the first brick of peace. The crossing place remained standing. The flag Tala made still fluttered in the breeze. Children returned from hiding and laughed again beneath the cottonwoods. That afternoon, settlers and warriors stood side by side rebuilding a scorched section of the outpost's wall burned. Only by one panic torch thrown too soon. It would be rebuilt stronger. Later that evening, Wyatt stood once again on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the mesa. When he had joined him, as she always did, Tala played nearby with children of every skin shade chasing a painted dog through the grass. You kept your promise, Winia said softly. Wyatt shook his head. I didn't. We did. She looked up at him. So what now, guardian of the crossing? He exhaled, watching the firelight glow in the windows behind him. Now, he said, we make sure it lasts. The world had changed, not in thunder or war, but in one long breath of courage. The fire in the wind had come, and it had passed. But peace, real peace, had just begun. Morning broke over the crossing place like a blessing. Light poured through the cottonwoods, spilling golden warmth over the dewy ground. Birds chirped in harmony with the soft hum of peace settling into the soil. Smoke curled from breakfast fires. Horses whinnied gently in the paddocks. Children's laughter once again echoed through the valley. Wyatt Boone stood near the river, hat in hand, watching its soft current as it flowed endlessly east, clean, clear, and alive. The same river where he had once pulled Tala from the water, the place where everything had begun. Now, that same river whispered a different story, one of survival, unity, and change. Behind him, the crossing had not only survived Doyle Mercer's raid, it had emerged stronger. Where fire had scarred the walls, new beams were already in place. Every tribe had sent fresh wood and helping hands. Settlers who once stood on the edge of distrust now shared tools, meals, and laughter with those they'd once feared. Peace was no longer an idea. It was a fact. Later that day, a sacred circle was formed near the mesa. 5 large stones, each representing one of the tribes Comanche, Apache, Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, were arranged in a wide ring. In the center, a ceremonial fire was lit, and tribal elders arrived in procession. They came not for war, nor even defense, but to talk of future. Wyatt had been invited to sit among them not as a leader, but as witness. Beside him sat Winia, and at her side, little Tala, dressed in a beaded dress made by hand by women from all 5 tribes. On her chest, a patch bore 3 symbols, a bear, a river, and a sun, the same ones she had drawn on her banner. Each elder spoke in turn. Red Elk of the Cheyenne spoke of the land not as property, but as responsibility. To share the land, he said, is not to divide it. It is to agree we all belong to it, and it belongs to none. Nacho of the Apache spoke of protection not with guns or fear, but with respect and law. When wolves come, we will not be scattered birds, he said. We will be the storm. A woman named Sky Petal of the Arapaho stood next. She had long white braids and a hawk feather cape. The crossing place is not just for our people, she said. It is for all people who wish to live with honor, and for the children of tomorrow. When the talking was done, a scroll was unrolled on the table, a new agreement, forged in ink and tradition, that would bind the 5 tribes and the settlers of the crossing place to a common path. It was written in 3 languages. It pledged, shared, guardianship of the land, mutual protection of the people, equal rights in trade, law and justice. And the right of all children regardless of blood or background to learn, grow, and lead in peace. Wyatt signed it not with pride, but with humility. Winia added her name. So did Tala, guided by her mother's hand. When the last signature was made, the crowd stood as one. Cheers rose, but not the wild, drunken kind of victory. It was quieter than that, deeper, like the sigh of a mountain finally allowed to rest. 3 days later, as the sun was climbing high, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. A rider approached the camp at full gallop, waving a white cloth. At first, everyone froze. Was this a second attack? But as the rider neared, the cloth was revealed to be a shirt. It was Jack Doyle, Doyle Mercer's nephew. Wyatt stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. Jack dismounted, chest heaving. I had to come, he panted. It's Doyle. He's sick. Winia asked. Jack nodded. He was bit by a rattler the night after you let him go. Refused a doctor. Said if the land didn't want him, he wouldn't take its medicine either. Wyatt looked to the elders. I wouldn't ask for him, Jack added quickly. But he keeps muttering your name. And the girls, I don't think he's got much time. For a moment, silence settled over them. Then Winia spoke. Bring him here. By nightfall, Doyle Mercer lay beneath a cottonwood tree, pale and shivering. His skin was waxy, eyes sunken. He had refused to enter the camp itself, but when he saw Tala, he reached out with a trembling hand. I thought you were a ghost that day, he whispered, floating on the river, and the cowboy, I thought he'd turned against us. Tala didn't speak. She only knelt beside him and offered her blanket. Doyle blinked slowly. You saved her, and I nearly burned it all down. Wyatt nodded, crouching next to him. But you didn't. Doyle gave a bitter smile, not for lack of trying. Winia stepped forward. You came from fear, she said, but you're leaving with truth. Let it go in peace. Doyle looked at her, then up at the stars. He closed his eyes and never opened them again. 1 week later, at the edge of the river, a sacred fire was lit, not for death, but for renewal. The tribes and settlers stood in a great circle. Drums echoed softly through the trees. Tala placed her hand-carved doll on the river as part of the offering, letting go of pain, embracing what would come next. Beside her, Wyatt tossed a single bullet into the fire, a symbol not of war, but of the war that would never happen. Children danced around the fire, each carrying a stone with their family's mark on it. They placed the stones at the foot of the new outpost, anointing it with names, dreams, and belonging. Above it all, the stars turned silently in the sky, just as they had for centuries. But this night, they seemed to shine just a little brighter. Years later, in time, the crossing place became more than just a settlement. It became a town. A school was built where children learned from both tribal elders and settlers' teachers. A trading post grew into a marketplace where deer hides were traded for iron pots, and woven blankets fetched gold coins. No one asked where someone came from, only what they could offer to the future. Tala grew strong. She learned 3 languages, rode like the wind. She studied the law and medicine, and in her 20th year, she was elected as the first mixed-blood council leader of the 5 Fires Alliance. Winia taught the young women how to listen to the earth and how to stand like stone when challenged. Wyatt never stopped wearing his dusty hat, but in the twilight of his years, folks no longer called him Cowboy. They called him the Bridge Rider, because he never walked away from the river that changed everything. And so, the story that began with a cowboy and a drowning child ended with the birth of a nation of hearts, a place where fire was no longer feared, where tribes arrived not with war cries but with gifts, all because one man saw a child in the river and chose to save her, not because it was safe, but because it was right.